So we really are in this series, Countercultural. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and grab them and turn to that. I've noticed over the past week, specifically for me or whatever, I love it when the Lord shows up and really is just apparent in your life. You know, whether it's a scripture that you read, or maybe it's somebody that shows up and speaks to you, or maybe it's a song that you listen to, and that's been the case for me this past week or whatever. The Lord's just been precious, just been sweet, just showing Himself to me, even whenever I'm sitting here thinking, God, what should we do? What direction should we go in? Maybe some questions about God, where are you? And then all of a sudden, maybe someone comes and visits the office, and a scripture just points out to you. And that's kind of what today's message is as well. It's one of those messages that I think we need to hear, and maybe you don't need to hear it, but I needed to hear it anyway. And it's one that hopefully that would encourage us and get us walking with the Lord better today than we did yesterday. That's really my prayer for you today. Again, so if you've got your Bibles, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago we were in chapter 8. The Apostle Paul kind of gave us this principle that as Christians, we are really free to do whatever the Scripture doesn't forbid. But then he reminded us as if we're going to do that, we've got to be mindful and really limit our freedom, limit our liberty for the sake of those weaker brothers. He says, think about your neighbor. Remember your brother. Remember your neighbor. And maybe you shouldn't say some things. Maybe you shouldn't do some things. Maybe you shouldn't go some places because your weaker brother would see that and it would cause them to stumble. He says, so don't hinder your brother. Don't do anything that would cause your brother to stumble. Then last week, we were in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and Paul again pointed it to his own life and his own ministry. And he says that he was actually, deserving of support from the church and that sort of thing, but he chose not to take it. So we kind of looked at Paul's example, and as followers of Christ, we too sometimes give up our rights. Give up our rights for the sole purpose of the gospel moving forward. So now we're going to be in chapter 10. And in chapter 10, Paul uses these kind of final remarks on this countercultural thing, on this kind of mindset of how to live outside of the culture. And he says, basically what we're going to have to do is it's all about how we make decisions. So again, today I hopefully can encourage you about how to go about making decisions. Paul wanted the Corinthian church to make decisions that were pleasing to God. And decisions that please God lead us ultimately to worship Him, lead us ultimately to live like Him. Now, the Corinthians, they were free in their faith. They were blessed in wisdom. They were strong. But the problem was that sometimes whenever we feel confident in our faith, that confidence can get us in trouble. Has confidence ever gotten you in trouble before? Maybe not. I don't know. There's a lot of times some people, they get so overconfident that overconfidence leads them to trouble. I can remember it's been probably 5 years ago now. We were in India, and Sarah had me building some things made out of wood. For some purpose, for some reason, she thought I was good at construction. By the way, I'm not very good at construction at all. She had me using this saw, and in India, they don't have the same kind of rules that we have. We try to make things safe here in America. In India, they really don't care about safety at all. It's just kind of get the things done. So I had this saw, and it had no guards on it at all. It was just a straight blade, basically. So I had this straight blade, and I was supposed to be cutting this wood. And again, I'm not the most, talented person at this kind of stuff. And as I was cutting the wood, I was feeling good about myself. I was feeling confident, if you will. I got this. I can handle this. No problem. I can cut wood. How hard is it? So I'm sitting there cutting wood with this saw with no blade, and all of a sudden it hit a knot. And when it hit a knot, the saw jumped out of my hand. When it jumped out of my hand, it cut my arm almost off. Cut my arm off. Then it hit the washing machine beside me, ripped the whole side of the washing machine, and then all of a sudden it's on the ground, just so finally we kind of got our stuff together and we unplugged the thing, and I noticed my arm was falling off. So I told Sarah I might need a cloth to put it back together, but it's okay. I've got a nice scar other than that. But it all came from this one purpose, just overconfidence. And overconfidence got me in trouble, and it almost got my hand cut off. Overconfidence can get us in trouble spiritually as well. In fact, this is the verse. I talk about my wife Sarah a lot, but I love her, so that's why I talk about her a lot. But this is one section of Scripture Sarah hates me preaching. I will admit that. Because I use it a lot of times, and I always tell her, that this is a section of Scripture that I speak of often, and she hates it. This is just not one of her favorite scriptures. And here's the reason behind it, because I tell her this. I say, you know what? I could commit adultery one day. And yes, you know why she doesn't like that now, right? Because once I get to the point of where I say I never would or I never could, that's a little overconfidence. And if you get overconfidence, you might cut your arm off. And y'all don't know what I mean? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Lisa's like, what in the world are you talking about? Get it. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, let me show you this verse. Verse 12. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12. This is what I'm talking about. This is why Sarah doesn't like this verse. Therefore, so, whoever thinks he stands, whoever thinks he's got it all together, whoever thinks he can't mess up, whoever thinks he can't sin, whoever thinks he can't commit adultery, better be careful not to fall. In other words, it's saying, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 says this: don't be overconfident. Don't think you've got it all licked. Don't think you've got it taken care of. Don't be overconfident spiritually. Be careful. Be mindful. Watch out. You hear Paul using that terminology several times in his letters. Watch out. Be careful. Don't think you've got it all under control. And I think that's a danger for us sometimes. I think sometimes we walk around pridefully. I think sometimes we walk around overconfidently, and all of a sudden we're shocked when we mess up. We're shocked when we fail. We're shocked when we fall. And Paul said here, he says this: be careful, watch out, don't be overconfident. So that's kind of verse 12, but I'm going to back up to verse 1 and lead up to verse 12 now and tell you exactly why this is the case. In fact, there's a couple of key verses that Paul uses in this section to describe why we should be careful. The first is in verse 6. In verse 6, Paul says this: now these things became examples to us, so that we will not desire evil things as they did. And again, we're going to talk about it in just a minute, but Paul's going to give us some illustrations from the people of Israel, the Hebrews, and he's going to say the Old Testament was written to us as an example. He says, don't be like them. And then again, he says it in verse 11. Now these things happened to them as examples, and they were written as a warning to us, on whom the end of the ages have come. So here Paul's talking about twice. He says, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to give you some examples of, in the Old Testament, some examples of these Hebrews and how they were walking in overconfidence, and how they were walking thinking they had all the answers, and how they were walking thinking everything was okay. But I'm going to show you how time and time again they failed, how time and time again they messed up, and I want that to be an example to you so that you don't follow in their footsteps. Don't mess up like they did. So we're going to see that here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So Paul says, I'm going to give you a warning. Basically, that word warning there in verse 11, it actually means to put it into your mind. So Paul's saying this: I want to put this into your mind. I want you to be thinking about this. I want this to resonate so that you don't forget what they did, so that you don't repeat their mistakes. Isn't that a good lesson for us to think about? Think about what they did so that you don't repeat their mistakes. Parents, have y'all ever thought about that for your kids before? None of y'all? Don't make the same mistakes I made. Don't do these things because I've done them and the ending is not good. That's basically what Paul's talking about here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. He's saying there are some things that the Israelites did that were not wise. There were some things that the Israelites did that caused them to stumble, that caused them to fall. Don't do what they did. Learn from them. Place this in your mind. This is a warning to us not to do what they did. So Paul's going to teach us something. Christians are never in the place in their Christian faith, in their Christian walk, when we are immune to temptation. Did y'all hear that? Listen to me again. Christians, we are never in a place in our Christian walk where we are immune to temptation. So don't think you are. Don't think that you've got that. I've moved past that. I've licked that. I've won that. Every one of us in this room this morning, we're in danger of temptation. And we have to be mindful of temptation. In fact, Paul wrote to the church in Galatia, Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, Paul says this. He says, brothers, if someone is caught in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual should restore such a person with a gentle spirit. And then check this part out. Watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted. Now, we're really good at the first part of that, aren't we? We're really good at looking into the society, looking into the culture. We're really good at looking on the outside and saying, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? Hey, did you see them? I can't believe they said that. I can't believe they are doing this. We're really good at looking on the outside. We're really good at thinking about the people on the outside doing wrong and talking about them. But what we're not really good at is the second part of Galatians 6. Watching out for ourselves. Watching out for ourselves so that we also don't fall. So that we also don't mess up. Watch out for yourself, Paul said in Galatians chapter 6. Be careful. The same principle is going to be addressed here in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. When a Christian has become so confident of his ability to handle any situation, that overconfidence in and of itself is a danger. Paul says in chapter 12, or in chapter 10, verse 12. So the danger here is to be careful. So let's jump right in. If you got your Bibles, again, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm going to begin in verse 1. We're just going to learn some lessons from the Hebrew people. Verse 1 says this. Now I want you to know. Okay, I love the way he starts. Don't you see that? I've got some information, and I want you to know this. I don't want you to be thinking. I want you to understand this. Now, I want you to know, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food. They all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from a spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Verse 5 is interesting. But God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the wilderness. Now these things became examples for us, so that we will not desire the evil things as they did. Don't become idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to play. Let us not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in a single day, 23,000 people fell dead. Let us not test Christ, as some of them did, and were destroyed by snakes. Nor should we complain, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as examples, and they were written as a warning to us, on whom the end of the ages have come. So, whoever thinks he stands must be careful not to fall. No temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to humanity. God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape so that you're able to bear it. So what are we going to learn today? I got 3 simple things for you today. The first is this. First, let's look at how Israel was blessed. Let's look at how Israel was blessed. And in the first 4 verses there, Paul uses this word all over and over. In fact, he used it 5 times. He says, now, I don't want you to be ignorant. That's one translation. Now, I want you to know brothers, he says, I want you to remember what happened to the people of Israel. I want you to remember about how our fathers, how the Israelites, how the Hebrews, how they lived. I want you to remember that I took care of them. In fact, that's what he wants us to understand and wants us to see. He says, listen to how God took care of his people. And he took care of them in different ways. The first way God took care of them was God gave them his presence. God's presence was there. Did you notice in verse 1? Verse 1 says, now I want you to know, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. Now, if you don't remember this, when the people of Israel, when they left Egypt, God was with them, and the way that he was with them was with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. It was representative of God's presence. So God's people, as they were wandering through the desert in the wilderness, they could look up and they could see God's presence was with them. Now, what an amazing, let's be honest, how many of us would love to have that in our life today? Would that not be an amazing part? So if you're ever wondering what direction to go, you follow the cloud. And wouldn't that be helpful? And anybody ever had a decision? I wonder where I need to go. All of a sudden, you just follow the cloud. That's kind of clear, isn't it? This is what he's saying. He said they had God's presence with them. What an amazing advantage it was for them. But check out today, Christians. We have God's presence, not in a cloud, but we have God's presence in us. We have God's presence with us. We have his word that is written down for us. We have God's presence. So we need to be mindful and we need to remember the benefits that we have as well. That we have God's presence. But not only God's presence, we see something else. We see that they had God's power. We keep reading and it says in verse 2, it says, now all were baptized into Moses, into the cloud, and into the sea. Now again, what is this talking about? Well, if you know the story of the Old Testament, when they left Egypt, they were going until finally they came up to this Red Sea, and they couldn't go any further until God did something. Y'all remember what God did at the Red Sea? He parted the waters, right? They had God's power with them. What a marvelous demonstration of God's power when he parted the waters and he allowed them to walk down the middle of the sea on dry land. And after they got through, the army came behind them and God crashed the waters down. God's power was evident among them. God's power was with them. The Israelites, they could stand knowing that God's presence and God's power was leading them, that God's power was taking care of them. Let's be honest. If we were the Israelites, could we not just sit back and just bask? Could we not just sit back and rejoice knowing that God was with us? The Israelites were sitting there and they were like, wow, we have God with us. God's power was with us. But not just that, we keep seeing, let me keep showing you what else they had. A third thing, I call it, is God's provision. God's provision. Look in verses 3 and verse 4. Verse 3 and 4 says this, they all ate the same spiritual food. They all drank the same spiritual drink, for they all drank from a spiritual rock that was followed them, and that rock was Christ. Now, Paul here is referring to what they were eating. If you don't know the story, again, as the Israelites were wandering through the desert, God provided them food every morning. The Bible calls it manna. Every morning when they woke up, they had food. On several occasions, God gave them water from a rock. God was providing for them. God was taking care of them. So they never went hungry. Now again, what an amazing opportunity to see God's presence, to understand God's power, to have God's provision. He was taking care of them. Now that food was not just, the physical nourishment, but man, they had the water that was there as well, and God was always with them, and they could see God's presence, and they could feel God's power, and they could understand God's provision, and they were, let's be honest, I feel like they were very lucky. They were very blessed. Do y'all not think they were blessed? wow, the Israelite people were blessed to have all of these things available to them. There's one last thing. They had God's person. Did you see that last verse in verse 4? They had Christ. For they drank from a spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Not only did they have God's presence and power and provision, they had Christ himself. So here the Israelites were, and they knew God. They were walking with God. They were being blessed by God. They had all the spiritual advantages you would want. Now here's where we're getting ready to get into some trouble. Y'all ready? They had all the spiritual advantages you think we would want, and yet how did they respond? Well, the same way we respond a lot of times. See, a lot of times we have all the spiritual advantages as well. We have God's Word, we have God's Spirit, we are taken care of. We have all of these things, and yet sometimes we too fail. We too mess up, and that's exactly what the Hebrews did. So not only were they blessed, but you're going to see something. Secondly, there's some lessons we need to learn. There's some lessons we need to learn from the Hebrews. In verses 5 through 10, he talks about that. In verse 5, notice what he says. But God was not pleased with most of them. Now this is a weird verse for me. In verses 1 through 4, I just got through talking about all that God had did for them. That God was providing for them, that God was protecting them, that God was watching over them. I mean, all that God was doing for them. And then I come to verse 5, and that kind of makes me scratch my head. God was doing this for all of these people, but, verse 5, God was not pleased with most of them. In fact, that's such a true statement. In fact, I told you, maybe you don't know the answer to this, how many children of Israel, how many Hebrews came out of Egypt? Some people think over 2 million. 2 million people came out of Egypt. Check this out. How many went into the promised land? Anybody know? 2. Joshua and Caleb. Adults. I'm talking adults. Joshua and Caleb. You got all of these. 2 million people are walking. 2 million people are being led. 2 million people are walking in confidence that God's with them. God's taking care of them. And out of all of that, how many went into the promised land? Joshua and Caleb. You see verse 5? God was not pleased with most of them. Why? Why was God not pleased with most of them? Because they were walking around in overconfidence. Paul's about to detail the reason for God's displeasure. You see, simply having privileges doesn't guarantee successful living. Coming to church doesn't mean that everything's going to be okay. Even with these great advantages, you can be disqualified, if you will, from the journey of God. That word, if we keep reading, it says, for they were struck down in the wilderness. That word struck down literally means a catastrophe. They had a spiritual catastrophe. God struck them down. God was displeased with them because of a spiritual catastrophe that took their life. So what displeases God? Well, let's keep going. I'm going to keep reading, and I'm going to show you. This is how we can learn from the Hebrews. The first thing is this: don't crave evil things. How can we not walk around in overconfidence? How can we be careful? The first thing is this: don't crave evil things. Look at what verse 6 says. Now these things became examples for us. What's an example? Well, all the things we've been talking about. And these things are examples for us. What? So that we will not desire evil things as they did. Here's one of the problems that the Hebrews had. They just wanted evil things. They weren't satisfied with what they had. They had a desire for evil things. And God was not pleased. That word, again, don't desire. It has a word meaning boiling up, craving. Don't crave, don't boil up evil things. If you go back and read the story of the Hebrews, they kept longing, they kept craving for the old life that they once had. In fact, they complained to Moses over and over, oh, if we could just go back to Egypt. We would like to eat the onions and the leeks and the garlics that we once ate. They always wanted to go back. In fact, they always wanted to go back to the way life used to be. You know, I think Christians sometimes get into that same mindset as well. We like to live in the past sometimes. If I could just go back to the way things used to be. Oh, it wasn't as bad back in da-da-da-da-da-da. Be careful that we don't desire evil things. What is it that really captures your mind? That we will not desire. What is it that you're desiring? What is it that you're dreaming about? What is it that keeps in your mind throughout the day? What are you thinking about throughout the day? What captures your thoughts? Is it really something godly? Paul says, be careful. Watch out. Let this be an example so that we will not desire, crave evil things. See, one lesson for us is to realize what's going through our mind. What are we really thinking about? What are we really desiring? What's captured our thoughts? The second thing is this. He says, don't be idolatrous. Keep reading in verse 7. He says this. He says, don't become idolaters. You figure out where I got that point from? You know, it's real hard there, isn't it? He says, don't become idolaters. And again, an idol is anything that seizes adoration that belongs to God. Anything that takes the place of God and from our heart that becomes idolater. The Apostle John, he put it real clear in 1 John chapter 5. 1 John 5:21, he says, dear children, keep yourself from idols. Just keep yourself from idols. Stay away from them. Don't go near them. Run from them. Keep yourself from idols. I read an article this week from Chuck Lawless, and as he was writing this blog, one of the things that he was writing about is what is it that an idol looks like. And if you want to know if you have an idol in your life, here's a few things that he says you got to watch out for. The first is this. He says you refuse to give up a sin. There's something in your life that you know is wrong, but you refuse to give it up. He says, guess what? That's an idol. You've chosen that over God. Second thing, he says, if you refuse to give up a grudge. You ever thought about that before? If you refuse to give up a grudge, if you won't forgive those who have hurt you, how can the Father forgive you? If you refuse to give up, if you refuse to forgive that person, you're letting anger become that idol. The third thing he says this is simply if you just don't pray much. Or you only pray when you have to, you think. All of a sudden it becomes about yourself rather than God, and idolatry can be yourself as well. Or you're living for the next thing on your list. Maybe that next presentation, that next position, even that next person that comes into your life. That next thing always becomes a priority. If your happiness depends on anything other than God, that can become an idol in your life. So he says, don't become idolaters. Don't become idolaters as some of them were. You see, that's exactly what happened to the children of Israel. They weren't happy with God's power, with God's provision, with God's person. So you know what they decided to do? Create for themselves an idol. And there they were in the wilderness with God's protection, with God's power, with God's presence. But they decided to ignore God and instead crafted for themselves an idol to start worshiping instead. And Paul says, learn from them. Don't worship idols. Don't do as they did. The third thing Paul says is this: don't be immoral. Don't be immoral. Now again, Paul's saying this, and he says it in verse 8. He says, let us not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in a single day, 23,000 people fell dead. Now this story is found in Numbers chapter 25, and if you don't know the story, the Moabite men and women and the Midianite women came together and they started seducing the Jewish men and tried to get them to commit sexual immorality. And that's exactly what they did. The Jewish men started having, sexual relationships with these people that they weren't supposed to. So God sent a plague, and over 20,000 people of them died. The end of this plague was kind of, interesting. The plague finally stopped when Aaron's grandson thrust a spear into the hearts of a couple who were engaged in immorality. Can you imagine that? That would stop a plague. Stop a lot of stuff, wouldn't it? So that's how the plague stopped. Read Numbers 23, kind of fun story, I guess. But here's the purpose. God's standard has not changed. God still says, let us not commit sexual immorality as some of them did. Now let's be honest, we live in a culture of sexual immorality, don't we? Everything you cut on, every television show you watch, every song that you hear, everything that's around us is surrounded by this. And if we're not careful, it's very easy to fall into those traps. And Paul says, keep your guard up, be careful, don't commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. Learn from them. Here's another fourth lesson that we can learn. He says, don't tempt the Lord. Verse 9, he says this, let us not test Christ as some of them did and were destroyed by snakes. Now again, that word test, where we get the word challenging from or whatever. And if you know the story here of Numbers chapter 21, the Jews were pushing God basically to his limits. So God sent these fiery serpents, these snakes to come and to punish the Jewish people. But he says, don't challenge God. Don't test the Lord. I think a lot of times we push God to see how far we can push God. I'm reminded of this every time I go to Walmart almost. Every time I go to Walmart, I see parents who are being pushed to the brink. Sometimes my kids are pushing me to the brink. But they're just seeing how far can we push, how far can we push before they snap, before they break. And we do that with God a lot of times. In fact, I've even had people ask that question to me. How far can I go and still not sin? That's the completely wrong question. It's not how far you can go and still not sin. It's just don't sin. Don't even think that way. Don't test the Lord. Don't tempt the Lord. Well, here's the last one before we get into some application points. Paul says this, don't grumble. Uh-oh. Look out. That's exactly what he said. Look in chapter 10, verse 10. Nor should we complain. Look, y'all be careful on this one. This is what he says. Nor should we complain as some of them did and were killed by the destroyer. The one thing that you really learn about the Old Testament, these Hebrew people, they were a complaining bunch. In fact, they grumbled at the Red Sea. They grumbled when they didn't have any food. They complained when they wanted some different kind of food. They complained when they had water. They complained about leadership. They complained about the heat. It seemed like every few steps they took, they grumbled and complained. They grumbled against God. They grumbled against Moses. And finally, God says, I've had enough of this. And in Numbers chapter 16, God did something quite interesting. The people were grumbling against God, and in Numbers 16, what God did, God just opened up the earth and swallowed 14,000 people who were grumbling. That's kind of interesting there, isn't it? There must have been times that I've prayed for God to open up the earth and swallow some people up. Hasn't happened yet, but But I mean, just to think what that must have looked like. They call these Korah's descendants. I've met some of Korah's descendants before. I've met some people who all they do is whine and complain. Have y'all ever met those people before? Who are constantly upset. Who complain that roses have thorns. And don't even forget that the thorns have roses. They just complain about everything. Well, here Paul says this. Be careful. We shouldn't be like that. Don't complain as some of them did. Paul says, here's an example. Here's a lesson from the Hebrews. Don't do as they did. Anybody got a problem with complaining in here? Maybe a lesson for us today. An application point for you. So let me close this morning by telling you the third thing and the last few things that Paul says. And this is for us now. How do we leave out of here? Well, Paul says this. Paul just says, so we need to live carefully. Be careful how you live. It doesn't matter who you are. We have to live carefully. That's what verses 10, 11, and 12 say. Look at what verse 11 says. Now these things happen to them as examples. And they were written to us as a warning. So all this thing that we've been studying this morning is an example and a warning. So in verse 12 he says, so whoever thinks he stands, whoever thinks he's got it all figured out, whoever thinks he's okay, whoever thinks he has nothing to worry about, be careful. Live carefully, not to fall. Live carefully. Be careful. Because once you think you've got it all figured out, is when you're really in trouble for failing. So what happens? Well, the Lord allows temptation to come into our life. Look at verse 13. So no temptation, and we're all tempted. But we have to be careful. But here's the good news. No temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to humanity. In other words, here's the thing. All the temptation that comes your way, guess what? Everybody else is being tempted too. As I'm standing up here, I'm tempted just like you are. We're all tempted. It's all common to humanity. But it keeps going. Let's keep reading. God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape so that you're able to bear it. There is a way to move past it. There is a way to go through it. There is a way to grow from it. He just says, don't fall for it. Grow from it. So when temptation comes our way, what must we do? Back to the third point. Live carefully. Live carefully. Realize what's coming our way. Understand what's coming our way. And whenever there's a temptation that comes, run. That's what I tell my kids. Run. Run away from the temptation. Flee from the temptation. Because we can escape. There is a way out. Here's the great news that I want to close with this morning. Whatever you've been tempted with or however you have fallen, God is faithful, as we just read in verse 13. God is faithful, and he has provided that way out. You know, for these Israelites, whatever sin that they had committed, and whatever sin that we have committed, God has given a way out. And ultimately that way out is Jesus. I'm so thankful to know that when Jesus died on the cross, he forgave me of all my sins. But just like I told someone even this past week, not only did Jesus die for all the sins I ever committed in the past, here's the great news, he committed for all the sins that I'm going to commit. Praise the Lord. He has forgiven me for all things. His death did it all. And it is finished. Now for me, I'm not walking around with my chest poked out and my pride saying I've got it all covered, because I realize I don't have it covered. That if I want to live a life that's pleasing the Lord, I have to be dependent on the Lord. I have to be walking with Him. I have to be mindful of Him. I have to be listening to Him. I have to be connected with Him. I cannot be off on my own. I got to be with Him. You see, the whole opposite of pride, the whole opposite of overconfidence is dependence. And I've realized in my Christian life that I can't be overconfident. I can't be prideful, because I know who I am. And I'm just a sinner. I'm a sinner who will always choose the wrong answer. Are y'all with me on that? Given to myself, I'm always going to choose the wrong answer. That's why I have to be dependent. I have to be dependent on Christ. I need my life to be dependent on Jesus. Every decision I make, every thought I think, every action I commit, I want it to be filtered through Jesus. That's the answer. And that's the way to get through temptation. So my prayer for you today is this. Are you dependent on Jesus? Or have you just been dependent on yourself? And if you're dependent on yourself, be careful. Verse 12. Be careful. Because when you think you've got all the answers, well, as an example from the Hebrews, you're going to fall. It's just a matter of time. Don't be selfish. Be dependent on Christ. This morning, I want to invite you to do that. Maybe you're here this morning, you've never given your life to Christ. You never made a decision to accept Jesus as your Savior. You've been trying to just be good. You've been trying to be religious. But you've realized you keep messing up. You keep falling short. And the reason is because you never can be good enough. You got to be dependent on Christ. I want to invite you to come this morning and maybe give your life and say, I want to follow Jesus as my Savior. Or maybe you've been here today and you've been visiting with us for weeks, and you just say, listen, today's the day. I'm going to join First Baptist Church to be a part of this mission of making, maturing, and mobilizing disciples. I want to be a part of this church family. I need somebody to hold me accountable. I need somebody to walk through this life with me. I can't do it on my own. I can't do it by myself. I need a church family to do this with me. We would love to be your family. We would love to walk through this life together with you. And to remind you, you're not alone. You're not by yourself. So again, don't be selfish. Join a family. Join a church body that'll hold you accountable, that'll help you out. This is why we were created, for one another. I invite you to come this morning. Would you bow your heads? Father, I thank you for your word. And God, I thank you for the examples. As we sat back and read how the Hebrews, how they failed time and time again. God, we saw so many areas in which, if we were to look at our own life, we too have probably fallen. And God, you said twice there that these are examples to us, warnings to us, for us not to be idolaters, for us not to be fallen into the trap of sexual immorality, for us to be careful how we live. God, I pray for our church body right now, the people in this room, that we examine our hearts. Are we careful how we live? Are we mindful, thinking about the direction that we're going? God, may none of us be prideful, thinking we've got all the answers. We've got it all taken care of. God, I pray for humility to happen in this church right now. God, that we would just come to you right now and say, God, I don't have the answers. I need you. I need to be dependent on you. God, if there's somebody here this morning who's just never said that simple prayer, I pray that today they would pray that they need to depend on you. They need to follow you. They need to trust you and you alone. God, I pray for a time of decision now. Allow it to be a time of where we don't just go through the motions, but where we are allowing your Holy Spirit to speak to our hearts, that we're open to your direction, and that we're listening as you are speaking. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.